The video call notification popped up at 11:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve, and the words that came through my laptop speakers hit like ice water in my veins. Face it, Cassandra. You're still the same broke little sister playing dress-up in a borrowed life. My brother Damien's voice dripped with the same condescension he'd perfected since we were kids. But this time, he had no idea that my security team was already 3 floors down from his corner office at Meridian Financial, waiting for my signal. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Cassandra Vale, and from wherever you're watching this, buckle up, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about family, success, and the price of letting someone underestimate you for the last time. Have you ever had someone so close to you, someone who shared your childhood, your DNA, your last name, completely rewrite your reality with a single sentence? Because that's exactly what happened to me during what should have been a peaceful Christmas Eve call with the only family I had left. I was sitting in my penthouse office in downtown Silverton, the city lights twinkling like scattered diamonds below, reviewing the final contracts for the biggest deal of my career. 3 years of building Vale Dynamics from a one-woman consulting firm to a multi-million-dollar security and risk management company, and tomorrow, Christmas Day, I was supposed to sign the paperwork that would make me the youngest woman to secure a government defense contract worth $47 million. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Damien was calling me broke, I was literally hours away from becoming one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the state. But let me back up, because the real story started 6 months earlier when I made the mistake of trusting blood over business sense. Damien worked at Meridian Financial, one of those old money investment firms downtown where the partners wore watches worth more than most people's cars and treated anyone under 30 like they were playing with Monopoly money. He'd been there for 8 years, climbing the ladder slowly, methodically, always complaining about being overlooked for promotions despite his obvious talent. When he called me in June, his voice was different, vulnerable, almost humble. Cass, I need to ask you something, and I know I don't deserve it. I should have hung up right then. Should have remembered every birthday he forgot, every achievement he diminished, every time he introduced me as his little sister who thinks she's a businesswoman. But family, right? Family is supposed to mean something. He told me about an opportunity. A client of his, some tech startup called Novatech Solutions, needed exactly the kind of security consulting that Vale Dynamics specialized in: corporate espionage protection, employee vetting, digital security audits, right in my wheelhouse. The contract would be worth $2.4 million, and Damien claimed he'd recommended me personally. I told them my sister runs the best security firm in the city, he said, and for a moment I actually believed he meant it. I spent 3 weeks preparing the proposal, market analysis, custom security protocols, a presentation that would make the Pentagon jealous. I poured everything into it because, honestly, landing Novatech would put Vale Dynamics on the map in a way that would change everything. The meeting was set for a Thursday morning in July. I walked into that glass conference room at Novatech, wearing my best suit, carrying a leather portfolio that cost more than Damien's monthly car payment, ready to close the deal that would launch me into the major leagues. Except there was no deal. There was no real meeting. What there was my brother Damien sitting at the head of the table with 3 Novatech executives, all of them looking at me like I was a door-to-door salesperson who'd wandered into the wrong building. "I'm sorry," said the lead executive, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who looked genuinely confused. "But we already awarded this contract to Meridian Financial's internal security division. Your brother here assured us that was what you were here to discuss. Perhaps a subcontracting arrangement?" The room went silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the sound of my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at Damien, waiting for him to explain, to clarify, to do anything except sit there with that slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Oh," he said, leaning back in his chair like he was discussing the weather. "Didn't I mention? Meridian decided to handle this in-house. But hey, maybe there's some smaller piece you could take on. Data entry maybe? Filing?" That's when I understood. This wasn't about a missed communication or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, calculated. Damien had used my expertise, my proposal, my 3 weeks of work, to position himself as the security expert at Meridian Financial. He'd stolen my ideas, presented them as his own, and landed himself the promotion he'd been chasing for years. All while making sure I was there to witness my own humiliation. I didn't explode. I didn't scream or throw my portfolio at his smug face or storm out like he probably expected. Instead, I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and said, "Congratulations, Damien. I hope it works out for you." Then I walked out of that conference room, took the elevator to the parking garage, sat in my car, and made 3 phone calls. The first was to my lawyer. The second was to my head of corporate intelligence. The third was to a contact I had at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Because here's what Damien didn't know about his little sister, who was playing dress-up in a borrowed life. I didn't just run a security consulting firm. I ran a security consulting firm that specialized in corporate investigations. And when you steal from someone who makes a living uncovering other people's secrets, you better make sure you don't have any of your own. It took my team exactly 4 weeks to find what we needed. Damien hadn't just stolen my proposal. He'd been skimming client accounts at Meridian Financial for 2 years, moving money through offshore accounts, falsifying reports, and covering it all up with the kind of financial sleight of hand that would make a Vegas magician proud. The Novatech contract wasn't just about getting a promotion. It was about legitimizing his position so no one would look too closely at the numbers that didn't add up. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We're still back on Christmas Eve, with Damien's voice echoing through my penthouse office, calling me broke while my security team waited 3 floors below his office. "You know what your problem is, Cass," he continued, and I could hear the whine in his voice, the holiday party in the background. "You never learned to think big. You're still that scared little girl who counted pennies while I was making real money moves. Face it, you'll always be small time." I let him finish. Let him get it all out. Every insult, every dismissive laugh, every word designed to make me feel like I was still 12 years old, begging him to let me tag along with his friends. Then, when he was done, when the silence stretched between us like a loaded gun, I smiled. "Damien," I said, my voice calm as still water, "you might want to look out your office window." The call ended with the sound of his chair scraping against the floor, and I knew he was walking to those floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the street, the ones that gave him such a perfect view of his kingdom. What he saw down there was going to change both our lives forever. But that's just the beginning of this story. Stay with me, because what happened next turned Christmas morning into the day my brother learned the difference between being successful and just playing dress-up in a borrowed life. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The discovery that my own brother had been systematically destroying my career while building his own didn't happen overnight. It started 3 weeks after that humiliating Novatech meeting, when something felt wrong about the silence. You see, in the corporate security world, news travels fast. When a major contract gets awarded, especially one worth millions, there are ripple effects. Phone calls, congratulations, industry buzz. But after Meridian Financial supposedly won the Novatech deal, there was nothing. Radio silence from a community that usually couldn't keep a secret if their lives depended on it. That's when I made a call to Janet Reeves, my former mentor who'd transitioned from corporate security to venture capital. She had her finger on the pulse of every major deal in the tri-state area, And if anyone would know what was really happening with Novatech, it would be her. "Cass, honey," Janet's voice carried that careful tone people use when they're about to deliver bad news. "I've been wondering when you were going to call me about this." My stomach dropped. About what? "The Novatech situation. Sweetheart, that company hasn't existed for 6 months. They filed for bankruptcy in February. Went under owing creditors nearly $8 million. I sat in my car outside a coffee shop in downtown Silverton, watching normal people go about their normal Friday afternoon lives, while my world quietly imploded around me. "That's impossible. I was in their office 3 weeks ago. I met with their executives." "Oh, you met with executives, all right. But they weren't from Novatech. Those were Meridian Financial employees. The whole thing was staged, Cass. The question is why." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every detail of that meeting, every word Damien had said, every look that had passed between him and those so-called Novatech executives. The more I thought about it, the more obvious it became. The conference room had been too clean, too generic. No company logos, no personal touches, nothing that actually identified it as Novatech's space. They hadn't just stolen my proposal. They had created an elaborate theater production designed to humiliate me, while positioning Damien as some kind of security expert within Meridian Financial. But why go to such lengths? That was the question that kept me staring at the ceiling until dawn. The answer came to me while I was reviewing Vale Dynamics' client roster the next morning. Over the past 2 years, I'd noticed a pattern I'd attributed to natural market fluctuations. Several potential clients had initially expressed strong interest in our services, gone through preliminary meetings, then suddenly disappeared. No explanation, no follow-up, just gone. I pulled up my CRM system and started digging deeper. Sentinel Corporation, initial interest in executive protection services, 3 meetings scheduled, then nothing. Apex Holdings wanted a complete digital security overhaul, preliminary contract negotiated, then radio silence. Morrison Industries needed employee background checks for a major expansion, seemed eager to move forward, then vanished. 6 companies over 18 months. All of them potential million-dollar contracts. All of them had simply evaporated after showing serious interest in Vale Dynamics services. That's when I remembered something that made my blood run cold. Every single one of those companies had one thing in common. During our initial conversations, they had each mentioned that they were also considering proposals from other firms. And in every case, they had specifically mentioned Meridian Financial's new security consulting division. Damien hadn't just stolen the Novatech proposal. He'd been systematically sabotaging my business for over a year, using his position at Meridian to intercept my potential clients and redirect them to his own department. The scope of what he'd done started to crystallize. This wasn't sibling rivalry or even ordinary corporate competition. This was a coordinated campaign to destroy Vale Dynamics while simultaneously building Damien's reputation as a security expert, a reputation built entirely on my work, my ideas, my client relationships. I spent the weekend diving deeper into the connections. It wasn't hard to find once I knew what to look for. Damien had been cultivating relationships with decision-makers at companies that were natural fits for Vale Dynamics services. He'd been positioning himself as an insider who could provide the same expertise at a lower cost through Meridian's, quote, established infrastructure. But here's what really made my hands shake as I scrolled through months of data. He'd been using information from our family dinners, our occasional coffee meetings, the casual conversations where I'd mentioned exciting new prospects or challenging client situations. Every time I'd shared something about my business with my brother, thinking I was talking to family, he'd been taking notes. The Morrison Industries deal was the smoking gun. I found an email chain where Damien had reached out to their CEO just 2 days after I'd mentioned them during a Sunday brunch at our father's house. In that email, he'd referenced specific pain points that I had identified during my preliminary research, pain points I'd only shared with him in casual conversation. He'd been mining our family relationship for corporate intelligence. Sunday evening, I was sitting in my home office in Riverside Heights, surrounded by printed emails, client files, and a growing timeline of Damien's systematic betrayal, when my phone rang. It was him. "Hey, Cass. Just wanted to check in. You seemed upset after the Novatech thing. I hope you know I was just trying to help by getting you in the room." The casual tone, the fake concern, the complete rewriting of what had actually happened, it was breathtaking in its audacity. This wasn't the impulsive act of a jealous sibling. This was calculated, sustained psychological manipulation from someone who knew exactly how to exploit my trust. "I'm fine, Damien. Actually, I'm grateful for the learning experience." "That's great to hear. You know, there might be other opportunities coming up where we could collaborate. Meridian is always looking for reliable subcontractors for smaller projects." Smaller projects. Subcontractor. The condescension was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. "Actually, Damien, I'd love to learn more about how Meridian's security division operates. Maybe we could meet sometime this week? I'm very interested in understanding your methodology." The pause on the other end told me everything I needed to know. He was surprised by my eagerness, maybe even a little suspicious, but his ego wouldn't let him turn down an opportunity to demonstrate his superiority. "Sure, that sounds great. How about Thursday? I could show you around the office, introduce you to some of the team." "Perfect. I'll bring some ideas for potential collaboration." After I hung up, I opened my laptop and created a new folder on my desktop. I labeled it Project Homecoming, because that's exactly what this was going to be, bringing Damien home to face the consequences of what he'd built on the foundation of my stolen work. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. And for that, I was going to need help from people who specialized in digging up secrets that powerful men thought they'd buried forever. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd never thought I'd have to use against my own family. "Reynolds Investigations? This is Detective Sarah Chen." "Sarah, it's Cassandra Vale. I need to cash in that favor you owe me, and I need you to treat this like you're investigating organized crime." "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" "I need everything you can find by Christmas. This is about to become a family reunion that nobody's going to forget." Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that makes you believe anything is possible. I dressed carefully for my visit to Meridian Financial, charcoal gray suit, understated jewelry, the kind of professional armor that commands respect without threatening anyone's ego. I needed Damien comfortable, confident, ready to show off his kingdom. What I didn't tell him was that I'd already been inside Meridian Financial's building twice that week. Detective Sarah Chen worked fast. By Tuesday, she'd provided me with a complete dossier on Damien's activities, including his daily routines, his office location, and most importantly, his access patterns to the building's security systems. Turns out, having a brother who works in financial services has its advantages when you need to understand how corporate security operates from the inside. Wednesday evening, I'd conducted what I called a reconnaissance meeting with Amanda Torres, Meridian's head of IT security. Officially, it was a networking coffee between two women in cybersecurity. Unofficially, I was mapping every digital footprint Damien had left in the company's systems over the past 2 years. Amanda was brilliant, ambitious, and more than a little frustrated with what she called the old boys club mentality at Meridian. When I mentioned I was Damien Vale's sister, her carefully professional expression shifted slightly. "Oh," she said, stirring her latte with more force than necessary. "You're the security consultant." The way she said it told me everything. "You've heard of Vale Dynamics?" "I've heard of your work, yes. Some of it very recently presented in our departmental meetings." Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Your brother has some very innovative ideas about corporate security protocols." I leaned forward. "Amanda, hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to verify the original source of certain security proposals, how difficult would that be?" Hypothetically? Not difficult at all if you knew where to look. Email metadata, document creation timestamps, revision histories. Digital breadcrumbs are everywhere if you have the right access credentials. We talked for another hour, and by the time we parted ways, I had everything I needed to confirm what I already suspected. Damien hadn't just stolen individual proposals. He'd been systematically copying my methodologies, my client assessment frameworks, even my presentation templates, and passing them off as his own innovations within Meridian Financial. So when I walked into Meridian's gleaming lobby on Thursday morning, I wasn't just Damien's sister coming for a friendly visit. I was a hunter who already knew exactly where the prey was hiding. Damien met me at the elevator, practically glowing with self-satisfaction. He'd always been handsome in that effortless way that made things easier for him. Tall, dark hair, the kind of smile that made people want to trust him. Today he looked particularly pleased with himself, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Cass, you look great. Ready for the grand tour?" The elevator ride to the 32nd floor was filled with Damien's commentary about Meridian's, quote, culture of excellence, and his excitement about showing me how real corporate security operates. Every word was a small knife, designed to remind me of my place in his hierarchy. His office was exactly what I'd expected. Corner location, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Silverton, expensive furniture that screamed, "Important person works here." The walls were decorated with framed certificates, awards, and what looked like architectural blueprints from various security installations. "Impressive setup," I said, examining the blueprints more closely. I recognized the layout immediately. It was from the Blackstone Industries contract that Vale Dynamics had bid on 8 months ago. A contract we'd lost to Meridian Financial's more comprehensive proposal. "Thanks. Those are from some of our recent high-profile installations. This one," he gestured to the Blackstone blueprints, "was particularly challenging, required completely reimagining their approach to perimeter security." I nodded appreciatively. "The multi-layered access protocol is brilliant, very innovative." His chest puffed up with pride. "That was actually my idea. Took me weeks to develop the concept." There it was. The casual lie, delivered with such confidence that if I didn't know better, I might have believed him. Except I'd developed that multi-layered access protocol myself, 2 years ago, for a different client entirely. Damien had simply lifted it wholesale and applied it to Blackstone. "Walk me through your thought process," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I'm curious about your methodology." For the next 45 minutes, Damien proceeded to explain my own work to me. Not just the Blackstone project, but elements from at least 6 different Vale Dynamics proposals, woven together into what he presented as his comprehensive security philosophy. He used my terminology, my risk assessment frameworks, even my specific phasing strategies for large-scale implementations. The most surreal part was watching him get genuinely excited as he talked, as if he'd forgotten these weren't his ideas and had somehow convinced himself he'd actually created them. There's something particularly chilling about watching someone lie so completely that they start believing their own fiction. The key insight, he said, leaning back in his leather chair, was recognizing that most security consultants think too small. They focus on individual vulnerabilities instead of systemic integration. That's what sets my approach apart from the competition. My approach, my insight, my methodology. Presented with the casual authority of someone who'd never doubted his right to claim credit for work he'd never done. "That's fascinating," I said. "I'd love to see some of your original research notes, your development process. As someone trying to build my own consulting practice, I'm always interested in learning from successful methodologies." Something flickered across his face, just for a moment, before the confident smile returned. "Oh, you know how it is with proprietary processes. Meridian has pretty strict policies about sharing internal development materials. Of course they did. Because there were no development materials, no original research, no creative process, just a systematic pattern of theft dressed up in corporate confidentiality. I understand completely, I said. Actually, that brings up something I wanted to discuss with you. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a folder. Inside were printouts of email exchanges, document metadata reports, and time-stamped file creation logs that Amanda Torres had helped me compile. Every piece of evidence I needed to prove that Damien's innovative security philosophy was actually a collection of stolen intellectual property. I've been doing some research into best practices for protecting proprietary methodologies, I continued, opening the folder on his desk. You'd be amazed how easy it is to trace the original source of ideas, even when they've been adapted for different contexts. The color drained from his face as he looked at the first page, an email thread where he'd forwarded one of my proposals to his team at Meridian, with my name stripped out and his substituted as the author. Cass, I can explain. Oh, I'm sure you can. You've gotten very good at explaining things that aren't yours as if they were. I turned to the next page, which showed the metadata from his Blackstone presentation, clearly indicating that the original document had been created on my computer, with my user credentials, 3 months before he'd supposedly developed the concept. His hands were shaking slightly as he flipped through the evidence. Email after email, document after document, a complete digital paper trail showing 2 years of systematic intellectual property theft. This looks bad, but you don't understand the context. The context? I stood up, and for the first time in our entire relationship, I saw something in Damien's eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. The context is that you've built your entire career at Meridian Financial on stolen work. The context is that you've been sabotaging my business while using my own ideas to advance your own. It's not like that, Cass. Business is collaborative. Ideas build on other ideas. You never meant to get caught. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, the city continued its normal rhythm, completely unaware that 32 floors up, a carefully constructed house of cards was beginning to collapse. Damien tried to recover, switching tactics with the smooth desperation of someone accustomed to talking his way out of problems. Look, even if some of my work was inspired by our conversations, that doesn't change the fact that I've brought real value to Meridian. My clients are happy, my projects are successful. Your projects are successful because they're based on methodologies I spent years developing. Your clients are happy because they're getting security solutions that actually work. The only thing you contributed was the audacity to steal them. I closed the folder and stood up. But here's what you don't understand, Damien. This isn't just about intellectual property theft. This is about client fraud. Because every time you presented stolen work as your own original creation, you weren't just lying to Meridian Financial. You were lying to their clients, who paid premium rates for what they thought was innovative proprietary security expertise. The implications hit him like a physical blow. Client fraud was a career-ending accusation in the financial services industry. It was the kind of thing that didn't just get you fired. It got you blacklisted, investigated, potentially prosecuted. What do you want? His voice was barely above a whisper. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw not the successful financial executive he pretended to be, but the same person who'd been cutting corners and taking credit for other people's work his entire life. The difference was that now, for the first time, there were going to be consequences. I want you to understand something, Damien. This conversation, this is me being generous. This is me giving you the opportunity to control how this story ends. Because one way or another, the truth is coming out. I picked up my briefcase and walked toward his office door. You have until Monday to decide whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the problem. Choose wisely. The last thing I heard as the door closed behind me was the sound of Damien's chair creaking as he slumped forward, finally understanding that his little sister had just declared war. I didn't have to wait until Monday for Damien's answer. Friday evening, I was in my home office reviewing security protocols for the government defense contract when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Riverside Park, North Entrance, 8 p.m. Come alone, we need to talk. D. He'd gotten a burner phone that told me everything about his state of mind and his intentions. This wasn't going to be a family conversation anymore. Riverside Park at night was a different world from the manicured daytime jogger's paradise it became during business hours. The streetlights cast long shadows between the oak trees, and the walking paths felt isolated, despite being in the heart of Silverton. I arrived 15 minutes early and positioned myself where I could see both the north entrance and the main walking trail, old habits from my security training kicking in automatically. Damien emerged from the shadows at exactly 8 o'clock, but he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a man I recognized from Meridian Financial's website, Theodore Blackstone, senior partner and one of the most powerful attorneys in the state. Seeing him there sent ice through my veins. This wasn't just my brother scrambling to contain a family crisis. This was Meridian Financial mobilizing their legal artillery. Cassandra? Damien's voice carried a coldness I'd never heard before. Gone was any pretense of brotherly affection or nervous guilt. This was the voice of someone who'd made a choice about which side of the line he was going to stand on. You brought your boss to a family meeting? I kept my tone light, but my hand instinctively moved to the recording app on my phone. Whatever was about to happen, I wanted documentation. Mr. Blackstone is here as my legal counsel, Damien said, his posture rigid and formal. Given the serious allegations you've made, we felt it was necessary to have proper representation present. Blackstone stepped forward, his silver hair gleaming under the park lights. He was exactly what central casting would order for a high-powered corporate attorney. Expensive suit, predatory smile, the kind of presence that made courtrooms feel smaller. Ms. Vale, I understand you've been making some rather extraordinary claims about my associate's work product. Your associate? I looked between them, genuinely amazed by the audacity. Is that what we're calling intellectual property theft now? What we're calling it, Blackstone's voice carried the smooth menace of someone accustomed to making problems disappear, is a misunderstanding between siblings that's gotten out of hand. You see, when family members share ideas informally, it can create confusion about ownership and attribution. The legal maneuvering was already beginning. They were going to claim that anything I'd shared with Damien during family conversations was fair game, that sibling discussions couldn't constitute theft because there was no formal business relationship to violate. Confusion? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. There's no confusion about the metadata showing that documents were copied from my computer systems and presented as original work. Metadata can be manipulated, Blackstone replied smoothly, and more importantly, it doesn't prove intent. Young professionals often use templates and frameworks from various sources. It's entirely possible that Mr. Vale unconsciously incorporated elements from family discussions into his work without realizing the sensitivity his sister might feel about shared concepts. This was what 60 years of legal experience bought you, the ability to turn grand theft into an innocent misunderstanding with a few carefully chosen words. But I hadn't spent 3 years building a security company without learning how to spot and counter manipulation tactics. Unconsciously, I turned to Damien, who was staring at the ground like a guilty child hiding behind his parent. Is that your story? That you unconsciously copied my entire client assessment methodology? Unconsciously forwarded my proposals to your team with your name substituted for mine? Unconsciously sabotaged my client relationships for 18 months? Cassandra. When Damien finally looked up, his expression was a mixture of desperation and something else. Something that looked almost like hatred. You always do this. You always make everything about you. You can't stand that I've been successful at Meridian, that I've built something real without your help. The gaslighting was breathtaking in its scope, Here was my brother, caught red-handed stealing my work, attempting to flip the narrative so that I was the problem for discovering his theft. Without my help? My voice rose despite my attempts to stay calm. Damien, your entire career at Meridian is built on my help. The difference is that you stole it instead of asking for it. That's not how I remember it, he said, and I could see Blackstone nodding approvingly beside him. We're family. We've always shared ideas, collaborated, built on each other's work. If you want to retroactively claim ownership of every conversation we've ever had, that says more about your character than mine. This was the moment I realized that the brother I'd grown up with, the one I'd made excuses for and covered for and believed in despite all evidence to the contrary, was gone. Maybe he'd never really existed at all. Maybe what I'd taken for family loyalty had always been opportunistic calculation. Retroactively claim ownership? I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app. Let me read you something, Damien. This is from an email you sent to your team at Meridian last month. I've developed a revolutionary approach to integrated security assessments that will differentiate us from all competitors in the market. This proprietary methodology is the result of 2 years of intensive research and development. I looked up at him. 2 years of intensive research. Your words. Proprietary methodology. Also your words. Does that sound like family collaboration to you? Blackstone intervened before Damien could answer. Ms. Vale, I think we're getting sidetracked from the real issue here. The fact is that your allegations, even if true, represent a family dispute over informal idea sharing. Meridian Financial has acted in good faith based on work product provided by one of our valued employees. Any legal action you might be considering would be both frivolous and potentially damaging to your own professional reputation. The threat was clear. Come after us, and we'll destroy you in court while dragging your name through every legal mud puddle we can find. But then Damien spoke again, and his words cut deeper than any legal threat could have. Besides, Cass, let's be honest about what Vale Dynamics really is. His voice carried a cruel satisfaction that I'd never heard before. You're running a boutique consulting firm out of a rented office space, chasing contracts that real companies like Meridian handle as routine business. You want to talk about theft? You've been stealing time from real professionals by pretending to compete in a league you'll never belong to. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Blackstone looked uncomfortable with the personal venom in Damien's attack. You think this is about professional jealousy? I stared at my brother, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in our entire relationship. You think I'm upset because you're successful? I think you're upset because I'm more successful than you ever imagined possible, and you can't stand that I did it without needing little sister's help. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for me. Face the truth, Cassandra. You've spent your whole life being the responsible one, the achiever, the one everyone was supposed to be proud of. And here I am, making more money in a month than you make in a year, working with clients you could never access, building something you could never touch. Each word was designed to hit exactly where he knew I was most vulnerable. My fears about not being successful enough, not growing fast enough, not commanding the respect that established firms like Meridian took for granted. You want to know what really happened with those clients you think I stole? Damien continued, his smile cruel and satisfied. They came to me because they wanted to work with a real firm, not some startup run by someone who's still playing dress-up in the business world. They were never really your clients, Cass. They were just being polite until they found a professional alternative. The gut punch of those words hit exactly as he'd intended. Every insecurity I'd ever had about Vale Dynamics, every moment of imposter syndrome I'd fought through while building my company, every doubt about whether I belonged in the same conversation as established players like Meridian Financial, he'd weaponized all of it with surgical precision. That's enough, Blackstone said, clearly recognizing that his client was going too far. I think we've made our position clear. But Damien wasn't finished. You know what the funny part is, Cass? Even if everything you're saying is true, even if I did use your ideas, it doesn't matter. Because I'm the one who had the connections to implement them. I'm the one who had access to the clients who could pay for them. I'm the one who understood how to turn concepts into contracts. You can create all the brilliant methodologies you want, but without the platform to execute them, they're just expensive hobbies. He stepped back, straightening his jacket with the satisfied air of someone who'd just delivered a killing blow. So go ahead, file your lawsuits, make your accusations. Cry to whoever will listen about how unfair it all is. At the end of the day, I'll still be working with Fortune 500 companies while you're chasing small-time security gigs and pretending it's a career. The cruelest part wasn't the accusations or the threats or even the legal maneuvering. The cruelest part was the look in his eyes, the complete absence of any recognition that I was his sister, that we'd grown up in the same house, that we'd shared 28 years of family history. I was no longer a person to him. I was just an obstacle to be neutralized. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. "For now." I nodded, tucking my phone back into my jacket pocket. "Good, because I want you to remember this conversation, Damien. I want you to remember every word you just said to me. Because when this is over, when your career at Meridian is finished, and your reputation in this industry is destroyed, I want you to understand that it wasn't because of anything I did to you." I looked him straight in the eye. "It's because of who you chose to be." Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving them standing under the park lights. Behind me, I could hear Blackstone's voice, low and urgent, probably explaining to his client that he'd just made a catastrophic tactical error. But I wasn't thinking about tactics anymore. I was thinking about the recording on my phone and the decision I'd just made about how this war was going to end. Saturday morning, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt surgical. The recording from Riverside Park had changed everything, but not in the way Damien probably expected. His personal attack had accomplished something that years of business school and corporate consulting never could have. It had burned away every last trace of sisterly sentiment and left behind something much more dangerous: complete professional clarity. I spent the weekend transforming my home office into a war room. 3 laptops, dual monitors, a secure encrypted server, and enough legal documentation to choke a corporate law firm. By Sunday evening, I had constructed what I privately called the Damien Files, a comprehensive digital dossier that would have made the FBI's white-collar crime division proud. But files and evidence were just the foundation. What I needed now was a systematic campaign to dismantle everything he built, piece by careful piece, using the same methodical precision he'd shown in stealing my work. Monday morning began with a call to Marcus Chen at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Marcus and I had worked together 3 years earlier when Vale Dynamics had helped uncover an embezzlement scheme at a mid-sized investment firm. He owed me a favor, and more importantly, he understood how financial fraud operated in the consulting space. "Cassandra, good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" "Marcus, I need to report potential securities fraud involving a senior employee at Meridian Financial. We're talking about systematic misrepresentation of proprietary methodologies to clients, falsified work product, and possible client billing irregularities." The line went quiet for a long moment. "That's a serious accusation. What kind of evidence are we talking about?" "Digital forensics showing intellectual property theft, recorded admissions of fraudulent practices, and client communications that demonstrate deliberate misrepresentation, plus financial records showing unauthorized use of proprietary consulting frameworks. Can you quantify the financial impact?" I pulled up my spreadsheet. "Conservative estimate? $2.7 million in fraudulent billings over 18 months, based on contracts awarded using stolen methodologies. That doesn't include the business interference claims or the damages to my company's reputation. Send me everything you have, encrypted, obviously. If this is as extensive as you're describing, We'll need to coordinate with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. The second call went to Jennifer Walsh at the State Licensing Board for Financial Advisors. Jennifer was a former prosecutor who'd moved into regulatory enforcement, and she had a particular talent for making corporate executives very uncomfortable. Jennifer, I need to file a formal complaint against a licensed financial advisor for professional misconduct and client fraud. What's the nature of the misconduct? Systematic misrepresentation of professional qualifications, theft of proprietary consulting methodologies, and fraudulent billing practices. The advisor has been presenting stolen work as original expertise and charging premium rates for services he's not qualified to provide. Do you have documentation? Enough to fill a small library, including recorded admissions and digital forensics proving the theft of intellectual property. File the formal complaint through our secure portal. Include everything. If your allegations are substantiated, we're looking at license suspension at minimum, possibly permanent revocation. The third call was the most important one. Amanda Torres answered on the first ring. Cassandra, I was hoping you'd call. I've been doing some additional research into those document anomalies we discussed. What did you find? Let's just say that if someone wanted to conduct a comprehensive audit of specific employee activities, they would find some very interesting patterns in our system logs. Patterns that might indicate unauthorized access to proprietary information and systematic data exfiltration. Amanda's careful phrasing told me everything I needed to know. As Meridian's head of IT security, she couldn't directly participate in anything that might compromise her position, but she could certainly ensure that the right information became available through proper channels. Amanda, hypothetically speaking, if someone were to file a formal complaint with corporate headquarters about potential intellectual property theft, how quickly could internal audit access those system logs? Hypothetically, internal audit could pull comprehensive access records within 24 hours. Email metadata, file transfer logs, document creation histories. The full digital footprint, especially if they had specific timeframes and employee credentials to investigate. And if that investigation revealed systematic policy violations. Policy violations of that magnitude would trigger immediate suspension pending full investigation. Meridian doesn't mess around with intellectual property issues, especially when client trust is involved. The fourth call required a different approach entirely. I dialed the direct line for Robert Mitchell, Meridian Financial's Chief Compliance Officer. Mitchell was old-school Wall Street, the kind of executive who'd built his reputation on zero tolerance for anything that could threaten the firm's regulatory standing. Mr. Mitchell, this is Cassandra Vale, from Vale Dynamics. I need to schedule a meeting to discuss potential compliance violations involving one of your senior associates. What kind of violations are we talking about, Ms. Vale? Intellectual property theft, client misrepresentation, and possible securities fraud. I have substantial documentation that one of your employees has been systematically stealing proprietary consulting methodologies and presenting them as original Meridian work product. The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Ms. Vale, these are extremely serious allegations. Do you understand the implications of what you're suggesting? Mr. Mitchell, I'm suggesting that Meridian Financial has been unknowingly billing clients for stolen intellectual property, which exposes the firm to significant liability for fraudulent billing practices. I'm offering you the opportunity to address this internally before it becomes a regulatory matter. What kind of documentation do you have? Digital forensics, recorded admissions, email metadata, client communications, and financial records. Enough evidence to support formal complaints with the SEC, the State Licensing Board, and potentially criminal fraud charges. Another long pause. Can you be here tomorrow morning at 9? I'll be there. The fifth call was to my lawyer, Patricia Reynolds. Patricia specialized in intellectual property litigation and had a particular talent for making corporate theft very expensive for the perpetrators. Patricia, I need you to prepare 3 sets of legal documents. First, a comprehensive lawsuit against Damian Vale individually for intellectual property theft, business interference, and fraudulent misrepresentation. Second, a notice of potential legal action against Meridian Financial for negligent supervision and benefiting from stolen intellectual property. Third, a formal demand for damages including restitution, lost profits, and punitive damages. What's our total damages claim looking like? $4.2 million in direct losses, another $6 million in lost business opportunities, plus punitive damages for willful theft. And Patricia, I want everything filed simultaneously on Wednesday morning. No warning, no settlement negotiations, no courtesy calls. Cassandra, that's a nuclear option. Once we file, there's no going back. There was no going back the moment he decided to steal my life's work and call me a fraud to my face. The sixth and final call was to Detective Sarah Chen. Sarah, I need you to coordinate with federal authorities on potential wire fraud charges. The intellectual property theft crossed state lines when stolen methodologies were used to secure contracts with out-of-state clients. How solid is your evidence? Rock solid. Digital forensics, recorded confessions, financial records, and multiple witnesses. Plus, I've got regulatory agencies and corporate compliance already moving on parallel tracks. Cassandra, you realize what you're doing here? This isn't just about getting your brother in trouble. You're talking about destroying his entire career, possibly landing him in federal prison. Sarah, 3 days ago I would have agreed with you. But that was before he looked me in the eye and told me I was a fraud, playing dress-up in a business I don't belong in. That was before he made it clear that I'm not his sister anymore. I'm just an obstacle to be eliminated. I stared out my office window at the city lights, thinking about the systematic campaign Damien had waged against my business, the clients he'd stolen, the years of work he'd appropriated as his own. He made a choice, Sarah. He chose to turn this into a war. I'm just better at warfare than he realized. By Tuesday evening, every piece was in place. Wednesday morning would begin with my meeting at Meridian Financial, followed by simultaneous filings with the SEC, the State Licensing Board, and federal court. By Wednesday afternoon, Damien's world would start collapsing in ways he couldn't anticipate, couldn't prepare for, and couldn't stop. But the most important element of my strategy wasn't legal or regulatory, it was psychological. Damien had built his entire sense of superiority on the belief that he was smarter, more connected, and more ruthless than his naive little sister. He'd convinced himself that his corporate platform made him untouchable, that his legal representation made him invulnerable, that his insider status gave him insurmountable advantages. What he didn't understand was that I hadn't spent 3 years building a security consulting company. I'd spent 3 years learning how to identify vulnerabilities in complex systems and exploit them with devastating precision. And Damien had just revealed that he was the most vulnerable target I'd ever encountered. Wednesday morning couldn't come fast enough. Wednesday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency of a perfectly executed plan. At exactly 9 a.m., I walked into Robert Mitchell's corner office at Meridian Financial, carrying a leather briefcase that contained enough evidence to end careers. Mitchell was everything I'd expected from a chief compliance officer: sharp suit, sharper eyes, and the kind of controlled tension that came from spending decades keeping financial firms out of regulatory hot water. His office overlooked downtown Silverton, and I couldn't help but notice that it was exactly 2 floors above Damien's. Ms. Vale, thank you for coming in. I have to admit, your call yesterday raised some serious concerns. Mr. Mitchell, what I'm about to show you is going to raise more than concerns. It's going to fundamentally change how you view one of your senior associates and potentially expose Meridian to millions in liability. I opened my briefcase and withdrew the first folder. This contains a complete timeline of intellectual property theft spanning 2 years, document metadata, email forensics, and digital fingerprints showing systematic copying of proprietary consulting methodologies. Mitchell's expression remained carefully neutral as he reviewed the first few pages, but I watched his jaw tighten when he reached the email chains showing Damien forwarding my complete proposals to his team with attribution stripped out. "This is extensive," he said quietly. That's just the beginning. I handed him the second folder. This contains evidence of client misrepresentation. Your employee has been billing clients premium rates for what he claimed were proprietary Meridian methodologies, when in fact, they were stolen from Vale Dynamics. The silence in the room was deafening as Mitchell absorbed the implications. Client billing fraud wasn't just a personnel issue. It was a regulatory nightmare that could trigger federal investigations and massive financial penalties. Mr. Mitchell, I need you to understand something. This isn't a disgruntled competitor making accusations. This is a systematic pattern of professional fraud that's been documented with forensic precision. I pulled out my laptop and opened a presentation I'd prepared specifically for this meeting. Let me walk you through exactly how extensive this pattern really is. The first slide showed a timeline spanning 24 months, with every instance of theft marked in red. The visual impact was devastating. Dozens of incidents stretching back to almost the exact date Damien had started in Meridian's security division. October 15, 2023. My proprietary risk assessment framework for financial institutions is copied and presented as original Meridian methodology to Coastal Banking Group. November 3, 2023. My digital security audit protocols are adapted and sold to Pinnacle Investment Services. December 18, 2023. My executive protection guidelines are repackaged as Meridian's, quote, innovative approach to high net worth client security. With each date, Mitchell's expression grew more grim. This wasn't a case of accidental similarity or inspired adaptation. This was industrial espionage conducted by someone with inside access to both companies. How did you obtain this level of detail about our internal operations? Mitchell asked. Mr. Mitchell, I run a security consulting firm. Corporate intelligence gathering is literally what I do for a living. But more importantly, your employee was careless. He left digital breadcrumbs everywhere because he never imagined anyone would look closely enough to find them. I clicked to the next slide, which showed email metadata analysis. Every document your employee claimed to have created can be traced back to original files created on Vale Dynamics' systems. The timestamps don't lie. The user credentials don't lie. The revision histories don't lie. This could be coincidental. Similar methodologies developed independently. Mr. Mitchell, I interrupted gently but firmly. Look at slide 7. The screen showed side-by-side comparisons of text from my original proposals and Damien's Meridian presentations. Not similar language, not inspired adaptations. Word-for-word copying with only names and dates changed. This isn't inspiration, Mr. Mitchell. This is copy and paste theft. And it gets worse. The next slides showed financial analysis of the contracts Damien had secured using stolen methodologies. $4.7 million in billings over 18 months, all based on intellectual property that belongs to Vale Dynamics. Your firm has been unknowingly engaged in widespread client fraud. Mitchell set down the papers and leaned back in his chair. Ms. Vale, if these allegations are accurate, we're looking at a compliance nightmare that could destroy careers and cost Meridian millions in penalties. That's exactly right, which is why I'm here talking to you instead of starting with the SEC. His eyes sharpened. What are you proposing? I'm proposing that Meridian Financial has an opportunity to handle this internally before it becomes a federal case. You can investigate, you can take corrective action, and you can negotiate a settlement that protects both our interests. And if we don't? I closed my laptop and looked him directly in the eye. Then at 2 p.m. today, formal complaints will be filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission, the State Licensing Board, and federal court. Your employee will be facing criminal charges for wire fraud, Meridian will be under federal investigation for billing fraud, and this entire situation will become a public relations catastrophe that makes the front page of the Wall Street Journal. The threat wasn't subtle, but it wasn't meant to be. Mitchell needed to understand that this wasn't a negotiation about whether consequences would happen. It was a choice about who would control those consequences. What kind of internal investigation are you suggesting? Complete forensic audit of your employee's work product for the past 2 years. Full review of all client communications and billing records. Immediate suspension pending investigation results. And full cooperation with any external investigations that may follow. Mitchell picked up his phone. Amanda, I need you in my office immediately. Bring the incident response team and prepare for a Level 5 compliance investigation. Within minutes, Amanda Torres arrived with 2 other IT specialists and a woman I didn't recognize who introduced herself as head of internal audit. The mood in the room shifted dramatically as Mitchell explained the situation in terms that left no room for misinterpretation. We have credible evidence of systematic intellectual property theft and client billing fraud by a senior associate. I want a complete digital forensic audit initiated immediately. Preserve all email records, document histories, and system access logs for the past 24 months. Amanda's expression was carefully neutral, but I caught the slight nod she gave me. She'd been preparing for this moment since our coffee meeting. Mr. Mitchell, Amanda said, given the nature of these allegations, should we also review the employee's access to proprietary client information and confidential business intelligence? Absolutely. I want to know everything this person accessed, copied, or transmitted. If there are additional victims beyond Ms. Vale's company, I want them identified. The internal audit director spoke up. Sir, an investigation of this scope will require immediate suspension of the employee's access privileges and temporary administrative leave pending results. Do it. I watched the compliance machinery of a major financial firm swing into action with impressive efficiency. Within 30 minutes, they had outlined a comprehensive investigation protocol that would strip away every layer of Damien's carefully constructed facade. But the most satisfying moment came when Mitchell asked the question I'd been waiting for. Ms. Vale, I have to ask, how long have you been planning this presentation? Mr. Mitchell, I've been documenting this theft for months, but I only decided to bring it to your attention after your employee made it clear that he had no intention of stopping. Some people mistake patience for weakness. That's usually a fatal error in judgment. As I packed up my briefcase, Mitchell walked me to his office door. Ms. Vale, I want you to know that if these allegations are substantiated, Meridian Financial will pursue every available remedy. We don't tolerate fraud, and we don't protect employees who compromise client trust. I appreciate that, Mr. Mitchell. And I want you to know that my goal isn't to damage Meridian Financial. My goal is to ensure that theft has consequences and that the people responsible understand the difference between inspiration and fraud. Walking through Meridian's lobby toward the elevator, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. In 3 hours, the formal complaints would be filed. By evening, federal agents would be reviewing the evidence. By tomorrow morning, Damien's career would be over. But the most important element of this entire strategy wasn't the legal consequences or the financial penalties. It was the systematic destruction of the narrative Damien had constructed about himself. For 2 years, he'd built his reputation on stolen genius, convinced himself and others that he was a security expert, an innovative thinker, a rising star in the financial world. By the end of this week, everyone would know the truth. He was a fraud who'd built his entire professional identity on his sister's work, too arrogant to understand that theft always leaves traces, and too stupid to realize that some people are much better at uncovering secrets than others are at hiding them. The elevator doors closed, and I smiled for the first time in weeks. Phase 1 was complete. Phase 2 would begin in exactly 5 hours. At 2:17 p.m., my phone started buzzing like an angry wasp. I was sitting in my car outside the federal courthouse, having just filed formal complaints with 3 separate agencies, when Damien's name flashed across my screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then it buzzed again, and again. By the 4th call, I was genuinely curious about what desperation sounded like in my brother's voice. The voicemail was a masterclass in panic. "Cassandra, what the fuck did you do? They suspended me. Security escorted me out of the building like I was some kind of criminal. My access cards are deactivated, my computer is seized, and Mitchell is talking about federal investigations. Call me back. Call me back right now." The second voicemail was angrier. "I know this is you. I know you went to Mitchell with some bullshit story about intellectual property. You have no idea what you've started, Cass. No idea who you're messing with. Theodore Blackstone is going to bury you so deep you'll never see daylight again." The third voicemail was different, quieter, more calculating. "Okay, I get it. You're upset. You feel wronged. But think about what you're doing here. Think about the consequences. This isn't just about me. This affects our entire family. Do you really want to be the sister who destroyed her brother's career over a business dispute? We can fix this. We can work something out. Just call me back." I deleted all 3 messages without listening to them completely. Damien's desperation was irrelevant now. What mattered was that the systematic dismantling of his fabricated career was proceeding exactly according to schedule. By 3:30 p.m., I was back in my office when Amanda Torres called. "Cassandra, you need to know what we found in the preliminary audit." How preliminary are we talking? 4 hours of digging through system logs, email metadata, and document histories. It's worse than you thought, much worse. I put her on speaker and opened a new document to take notes. "Walk me through it." "Your brother didn't just steal your work. He's been running a systematic intelligence operation against dozens of competitors. We found evidence that he's been infiltrating proposal processes, copying bid strategies, and feeding confidential information to Meridian's sales teams." The scope of what Amanda was describing made my own case look small by comparison. How many companies are we talking about? At least 15 security consulting firms across 3 states. He's been using social media, professional networking events, even dating apps, to cultivate relationships with employees at competitor firms. Then he'd pump them for information about upcoming bids, client strategies, proprietary methodologies. I felt sick. This wasn't just about stealing from me. Damien had turned corporate espionage into an art form, systematically destroying the competitive landscape for his own advancement. "Amanda, does Mitchell know about this yet?" "He knows enough to understand that your case was just the tip of the iceberg. He's already reached out to legal counsel about potential RICO violations." RICO, Organized Crime Statutes. Damien hadn't just committed fraud, he'd potentially engaged in racketeering. What happens next? Full forensic investigation by external auditors. FBI Financial Crimes Unit gets involved tomorrow. And Cassandra? Mitchell wants to discuss a formal cooperation agreement with Vale Dynamics. You might be the key witness in a federal case. After Amanda hung up, I sat in my office staring out at the city skyline, trying to process the magnitude of what Damien had actually been doing. I'd thought I was exposing a thief who'd stolen my work. Instead, I'd uncovered a criminal enterprise that had been systematically defrauding the entire security consulting industry. My phone rang again. This time it was Patricia Reynolds, my lawyer. "Cassandra, I just got off the phone with federal prosecutors. They want to meet with you tomorrow morning." "About the intellectual property case?" "About much more than that. Apparently your brother's activities extend far beyond stealing your work. They're looking at wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, and possible racketeering charges. Your case against him just became the foundation for a major federal investigation." "Patricia, I just wanted justice for the theft of my work. I didn't sign up to be a federal witness in a RICO case." "I understand that. But Cassandra, what your brother did goes far beyond family betrayal. He's been systematically destroying legitimate businesses and defrauding clients across multiple states. If you don't cooperate with this investigation, he'll continue operating and more companies will be victimized." That evening, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. Subject: "Thank you, Pinnacle Security Solutions." "Ms. Vale?" I don't know if you remember me, but we met at the National Security Conference last year. I'm CEO of Pinnacle Security Solutions in Atlanta. I just received a call from federal investigators asking about our interactions with Damian Vale and Meridian Financial. I want you to know that your courage in reporting this fraud has opened the door for us to finally understand why we lost 7 major contracts last year to Meridian's, quote, innovative proposals that looked suspiciously like our own proprietary methodologies. We've been documenting similar theft for months, but couldn't prove the connection. Thanks to your investigation, we finally have answers and a path to justice. You saved our company. Thank you. Robert Chen, CEO, Pinnacle Security Solutions. By Thursday morning, similar emails had arrived from 11 other security firms across the Southeast. Companies that had been losing contracts, questioning their own competitiveness, wondering why their proprietary strategies kept appearing in competitors' proposals. All of them traced back to Damian's network of informants and systematic intelligence gathering. I'd thought I was fighting a personal battle against a brother who'd betrayed me. Instead, I'd accidentally exposed an industry-wide fraud scheme that had been destroying legitimate businesses for years. The federal meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. at the U.S. Attorney's Office downtown. As I walked into the building, I passed protesters on the steps. Not related to my case, but it reminded me that justice often requires ordinary people to stand up against systems that seem too powerful to challenge. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Santos was younger than I'd expected, with the intense focus of someone who'd built his career prosecuting complex financial crimes. His office was lined with law books and case files, and I noticed several boxes labeled Meridian Financial Investigation stacked along one wall. Ms. Vale, thank you for coming in. I want you to understand that your initial complaint has evolved into something much larger than a simple intellectual property dispute. So I'm learning. Based on the evidence you provided and the subsequent investigation by Meridian Financial, we believe your brother was operating a sophisticated fraud scheme that victimized dozens of companies and defrauded clients of millions in fees. Santos opened a thick file folder. What we need from you is complete cooperation, full disclosure of all evidence, testimony before a federal grand jury, and potentially testimony at trial if this case goes to prosecution. What happens to Damian? If convicted on all charges we're considering, he's looking at 15 to 25 years in federal prison. This isn't just about stealing your work anymore, Ms. Vale. This is about organized fraud on a scale that threatens the integrity of an entire industry. I thought about the brother I'd grown up with, the one who'd shared Christmas mornings and family vacations and late-night conversations about our dreams for the future. That person felt like a stranger now, someone I'd imagined rather than someone who'd ever really existed. Mr. Santos, I need you to understand something. When I started this process, I was trying to save a relationship with my brother. I thought if I could make him face consequences for his actions, maybe he'd finally understand what he'd done and we could find a way back to being family. I paused, thinking about the voicemails full of threats and manipulation, the complete absence of remorse or recognition of wrongdoing. But that person, the brother I was trying to save, he doesn't exist anymore. Maybe he never did. What exists now is a criminal who's been systematically destroying other people's lives and businesses for his own gain. I looked Santos directly in the eye. I'll cooperate fully with your investigation. Not because I want revenge against my brother, but because the companies he's victimized deserve justice. And because if I don't help stop him now, he'll just find new ways to hurt people. Ms. Vale, I have to ask, are you prepared for the personal cost of this decision? Your brother will likely face significant prison time if convicted. Your family relationships will be permanently altered. This isn't something you can undo once we move forward. I thought about the voicemails, the park meeting, the cruel dismissal of my entire career as playing dress-up in a business I don't belong in. I thought about the 15 companies he'd systematically defrauded, the careers he'd destroyed, the trust he'd betrayed. Mr. Santos, my brother made that choice for me when he decided that I was just an obstacle to be eliminated rather than family to be respected. I'm just making sure his choices finally have consequences. As I signed the cooperation agreement, I realized that this wasn't the ending I'd imagined when I first discovered the theft. I thought I was fighting to save a relationship. Instead, I was formally severing it forever, choosing justice over family loyalty and truth over the comfortable fiction of blood being thicker than water. The brother I'd grown up with was gone. What remained was a criminal who happened to share my DNA, and I was no longer willing to protect him from the consequences of his own actions. The character assassination began on Friday morning. I was reviewing federal grand jury preparation materials when my phone started buzzing with notifications from LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Screenshots flooded my messages from colleagues and friends, all showing the same coordinated campaign that had appeared overnight across social media platforms. The posts were sophisticated, carefully crafted to look like organic support for a wrongly accused professional. They painted a picture of a dedicated financial services expert being destroyed by a vindictive sibling who couldn't handle his success. LinkedIn post, Theodore Blackstone. In 30 years of legal practice, I've rarely seen such a calculated attempt to destroy a brilliant young professional's career. Damian Vale's innovative contributions to corporate security at Meridian Financial have revolutionized how we approach client protection. The allegations against him appear to be the result of sibling rivalry, taken to dangerous extremes. I encourage the professional community to look beyond sensationalized accusations and recognize the real victim in this situation. Facebook post, Rachel Morrison, former Meridian client. I worked with Damian Vale on a major security overhaul for my company last year. His expertise and professionalism were exceptional. It's heartbreaking to see someone's reputation destroyed by family jealousy. The business world needs more innovators like Damian, not fewer. Instagram story, Silverton business. Exclusive. Local entrepreneur accused of fabricating evidence against successful brother. Sources close to the situation suggest Vale Dynamics CEO Cassandra Vale has been struggling financially and may have orchestrated elaborate fraud claims to eliminate a competitor. The posts kept coming, each one more polished than typical social media content, each one hitting the same talking points with suspicious consistency. Someone had hired a professional reputation management firm to flood the internet with pro-Damian narratives, while subtly destroying my credibility. But the social media campaign was just the beginning. By noon, I'd received calls from 3 different reporters wanting to interview me about the family feud that's rocking Silverton's business community. Someone had been feeding them a carefully curated version of events that cast me as the unstable sister destroying an innocent brother's career. Ms. Vale, we're hearing reports that you've been struggling to compete with established firms like Meridian Financial and may have fabricated these allegations to eliminate a successful competitor. Would you like to comment? I declined all interview requests and forwarded the reporter's contact information to U.S. Attorney Santos. If they wanted the real story, they could wait for the federal indictments. The afternoon brought a different kind of pressure. My office assistant, Jennifer, knocked on my door with an expression I'd never seen before, equal parts concern and confusion. Cassandra, we've been getting strange calls all morning. People asking about Vale Dynamics' financial stability, whether we're facing bankruptcy, if it's true that you've been falsifying client testimonials. What kind of people? Some claim to be from trade publications. Others said they were potential clients who'd heard quote, 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 concerning reports about the company. But Cassandra, the questions were too similar, too coordinated. Someone's running a systematic disinformation campaign against us. I pulled up Vale Dynamics Google reviews and felt my stomach drop. Overnight, we'd received 15 one-star reviews from accounts with generic names and no profile pictures. All of them mentioned concerns about, quote, unethical business practices, questionable integrity, and family drama affecting professional judgment. Review from Business Watch 2024 inches. considered Vale Dynamics for a security consultation but discovered concerning information about the owner's ongoing legal issues and questionable accusations against family members. Would recommend more established firms with proven track records. Review from Corporate User 77 inches. Heard troubling reports about this company's stability and the owner's tendency toward vindictive behavior against competitors. Too much drama for a professional security firm. The reviews were clearly fake. The writing style was too similar, the talking points too coordinated, the timing too convenient, but they were also effective. Our online reputation was being systematically demolished by professionals who understood exactly how to damage a small business's credibility. My phone rang again. This time it was my accountant, David Park. Cassandra, I've been getting calls from people claiming to be from various government agencies asking about Vale Dynamics' tax status and financial records. What kind of agencies? That's the thing. When I called the numbers back, they either didn't answer or went to generic voicemail systems. I think someone's impersonating federal agents to fish for information about your business. The sophistication of the campaign was breathtaking. Whoever Damien had hired wasn't just managing his public image. They were actively trying to destroy mine through coordinated attacks on every front where a small business is vulnerable. That evening, I discovered the crown jewel of their strategy. My cousin Rachel called, her voice tight with anger. Cassandra, I just got off the phone with Aunt Margaret. She's been telling everyone in the family that you've had some kind of psychological breakdown and are making up stories about Damien to cover for your business failures. What exactly is she saying? That you've been struggling with Vale Dynamics for months, that you're facing bankruptcy, and that you've invented this whole intellectual property story to deflect from your own professional failures. She's saying the family needs to rally around Damien during this, quote, difficult time when his mentally unstable sister is trying to destroy his career. The cruelest part wasn't the lies, it was the kernel of truth woven throughout. Vale Dynamics had faced challenges. I had been working longer hours, dealing with stress, fighting to establish credibility in a competitive market. Someone had taken those normal business struggles and weaponized them into a narrative of professional incompetence and psychological instability. Rachel, you don't believe that, do you? Of course not, but Cassandra, half the family does. Aunt Margaret has been calling everyone, cousins, family friends, even some of your father's old business contacts. She's telling them you need intervention, and that supporting your accusations against Damien would be enabling your delusions. I sat in my living room that night, scrolling through the coordinated attack on my reputation, my business, and my sanity, and felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood: complete isolation. The professional community was reading carefully crafted lies about my stability and integrity. My family was being told I was having a psychological breakdown. Potential clients were seeing fake reviews questioning my ethics and competence. It was masterfully executed character assassination, designed to make me appear exactly like what abusers always claim their victims are: unstable, vindictive, and unreliable. But there was one element of their strategy that revealed just how desperate they were becoming. Saturday morning, I received a certified letter from Blackstone & Associates, the law firm representing Damien. The letter was addressed not just to me, but copied to my lawyer, my accountant, 3 of my largest clients, and the president of the Silverton Business Association. Notice of defamation and demand for retraction. Ms. Vale has engaged in a systematic campaign of defamation against our client, Mr. Damien Vale, including false accusations of criminal conduct, fraudulent business practices, and professional misconduct. These accusations have caused substantial damage to our client's reputation and career prospects. We demand immediate retraction of all false statements, public acknowledgement that the accusations were unfounded, and cessation of all cooperation with any investigations based on these fabricated claims. Failure to comply within 72 hours will result in legal action seeking damages for defamation, intentional interference with business relationships, and malicious prosecution. The letter was designed to accomplish several things: make me appear litigious and unstable to my professional network, create pressure to drop the federal cooperation, and establish a legal record that could be used to challenge my credibility as a witness. But it also revealed something important. They were running scared. You don't launch a coordinated character assassination campaign against someone whose accusations you can easily disprove with facts. You don't hire professional reputation management firms and threaten defamation lawsuits unless you're desperate to control a narrative that's slipping away from you. They weren't trying to prove Damien's innocence anymore. They were trying to destroy my credibility before the federal case could proceed to trial. Sunday evening, I called U.S. Attorney Santos. Mr. Santos, you need to know that Damien's legal team is running a sophisticated disinformation campaign against me. Social media manipulation, fake reviews, family pressure, and now defamation threats copied to my clients and professional contacts. Ms. Vale, that's actually good news for our case. How is character assassination good news? Because desperate people make mistakes. And everything they're doing right now, the social media campaign, the fake reviews, the intimidation tactics, that's additional evidence of consciousness of guilt. People don't spend tens of thousands of dollars on reputation management firms when they're innocent. What should I do about the defamation letter? Nothing. Don't respond, don't retract anything, don't engage with their theater. Let them escalate. Every move they make is just more evidence that they're trying to obstruct a federal investigation through witness intimidation. As I hung up, I realized that Damien and his legal team had made a critical strategic error. They'd revealed their desperation too early and too obviously. Instead of quietly preparing a defense, they'd launched a public relations war that would ultimately backfire when the federal indictments were unsealed. The character assassination campaign wasn't just morally reprehensible, it was tactically stupid. And in a few weeks, everyone who'd participated in spreading lies about my mental state and professional competence would have to explain their actions when the FBI's evidence became public record. Sometimes the best response to a lie is just waiting for the truth to catch up. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in November, sitting in Dr. Elena Rodriguez's office in downtown Silverton, when she asked me a question I thought I'd already answered. Cassandra, when did you first realize that your relationship with Damien wasn't normal? I'd been seeing Dr. Rodriguez for 6 weeks, initially just to manage the stress of the federal investigation and the character assassination campaign. But somewhere between discussing coping strategies and reviewing the timeline of events, our sessions had evolved into something deeper and more unsettling. What do you mean not normal? He's my brother. Brothers compete, they have rivalry, Cassandra. Her voice was gentle but firm. In 6 weeks of sessions, you've described a pattern of behavior that spans over 2 decades. I'd like you to walk through some of those early memories again, but this time I want you to imagine you're hearing these stories about someone else's family. Not your brother, not your childhood, someone else's. I shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair that had become familiar over the past month and a half. I don't understand the point of that exercise. Humor me. Let's start with the story about your 13th birthday. The memory came flooding back with unwanted clarity. Damien was 16. I'd saved money from babysitting to buy myself a new bike for my birthday. It was the first expensive thing I'd ever bought with my own money, a blue Schwinn with silver handlebars that I'd been wanting for months. What happened? The night before my birthday, Damien took it for a ride and crashed it into the Johnson's fence. The front wheel was completely bent, the chain was broken, and there were scratches all down the frame. I could still remember the sick feeling in my stomach when I saw the damaged bike in our garage. How did your parents respond? Dad said accidents happen and that I should be grateful I had a bike at all, even if it was damaged. Mom said Damien felt terrible, and that making a big deal about it would just make him feel worse. I paused, remembering the next part. Then Damien said he'd been planning to ask Dad to help him buy me a new bike anyway, so really the accident just gave him an excuse to get me something even better. Did he get you a new bike? No, he got me a used one from a garage sale 2 weeks later. It was pink. I hated pink, and it was too small for me. But everyone acted like he was being incredibly generous and thoughtful. Dr. Rodriguez made a note on her pad. So your brother destroyed something you'd worked hard to buy, faced no consequences, received praise for a gesture he never followed through on, and you ended up with something inferior to what you'd originally had. When you put it like that, it sounds… How does it sound? I sat with the question longer than I'd intended to. Manipulative, calculated. Like he got credit for solving a problem he created while I ended up worse off than when I started. Now tell me about high school graduation. Another memory I'd buried under layers of family mythology. I was valedictorian, full scholarship to State University. The graduation ceremony was on the same weekend as Damien's fraternity formal at college. What happened? Damien called the night before graduation crying, saying his girlfriend had broken up with him and he was having a crisis about his future and his self-worth. He needed family support, needed to know we believed in him. And? Mom and Dad drove up to his college to spend the weekend with him. They missed my graduation entirely. The words came out flat, emotionless, the way they always did when I told this story. But they said it was more important to support Damien during his emotional crisis than to celebrate my achievement because I was strong enough to handle success and he was more fragile. How did you feel about that? I told myself it was fine, that being strong meant not needing recognition, that family meant putting other people's needs first. I laughed bitterly. I spent graduation day alone, then went to work at my summer job that evening because I didn't want to sit in an empty house. Cassandra, what happened with Damien's girlfriend? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? The girlfriend who broke up with him, causing the crisis that required your parents' immediate attention. I stared at Dr. Rodriguez for a long moment as the realization washed over me. I never found out. By the time I saw him again at Christmas, he was dating someone new, and he never mentioned the breakup or the crisis. In 20 years since that graduation, has Damien ever mentioned that weekend? No, never. Has he ever acknowledged that your parents missed your graduation to support him? No. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward slightly. Cassandra, what do you think happened that weekend? The truth hit me like cold water. There was no crisis. There was no breakup. He made it up. Why would he do that? Because I was getting attention. Because I was succeeding. Because… I trailed off as the pattern became impossible to ignore. Because he couldn't stand not being the center of the family's focus. Let's talk about the business networking event, where you met the client who became your first major contract. I didn't want to revisit this memory, but the therapeutic process had its own momentum now. The Silverton Business Association annual dinner. I'd been working on landing Hartwell Industries as a client for months. The CEO, Robert Hartwell, was going to be there, and I finally had a chance to make a personal connection. What happened? Damien showed up. He wasn't even a member of the association. He crashed the event. But he's charming, he's good-looking, he knows how to work a room. I felt the old familiar knot in my stomach. He spent the entire evening positioning himself as the more successful sibling, the one with the real corporate job at Meridian Financial. How did that affect your interaction with Hartwell? By the end of the evening, Hartwell was more interested in talking to Damien about Meridian's services than Vale Dynamics' proposal. I lost the contract. And how did Damien explain his presence at an event he wasn't invited to? He said he'd heard I was nervous about the presentation and wanted to support me, that he was there as my cheerleader. The irony was sickening now. Everyone thought it was sweet how protective he was of his little sister. Dr. Rodriguez set down her pen and looked at me directly. Cassandra, I want you to consider the possibility that what you've been describing isn't normal sibling rivalry. What you've been describing is a pattern of systematic sabotage designed to undermine your success while positioning Damien as the hero of every story. But that would mean I couldn't finish the sentence. What would that mean? That would mean he's been doing this my whole life, that every time something good happened to me, he found a way to steal it, break it, or turn it into something about him. Let's look at the evidence. Your bike, your graduation, your first major client opportunity. The Novatech proposal. 2 years of systematic theft of your business methodologies. What's the common thread? The pattern was so clear now that I couldn't understand how I'd missed it for 31 years. Every time I succeeded or was about to succeed, Damien found a way to insert himself into the situation and either steal credit, redirect attention, or sabotage the outcome. And how did the family narrative usually frame these situations? As Damien being supportive, or Damien having problems that needed attention, or me being strong enough not to need recognition, I felt nauseous. They made me complicit in my own erasure. Cassandra, what do you think would have happened if you hadn't discovered the intellectual property theft? The question forced me to confront a timeline I'd been avoiding. He would have kept stealing my work. My business would have slowly failed as clients went to Meridian instead of Vale Dynamics. And everyone would have said it proved that Damien was the talented one all along. And how would that failure have been explained? That I was never cut out for business. That I'd been unrealistic about my abilities. That it was good I had a successful brother who could take care of me when my little consulting firm inevitably collapsed. The full scope of what Damien had been orchestrating for 3 decades crashed over me like a wave. This wasn't just about stolen business proposals. This was about the systematic destruction of my ability to succeed independently, designed to make me financially and emotionally dependent on a brother who presented himself as generous, while actively sabotaging every opportunity I created. Dr. Rodriguez, are you saying my brother is a sociopath? I'm saying your brother has displayed a consistent pattern of behavior that prioritizes his own advancement over your well-being, uses manipulation and deception to achieve his goals, and shows no genuine empathy for the harm he causes you. Whether that meets clinical definitions is less important than understanding how it's affected your life. I sat in silence for several minutes, processing not just the recent theft, but a lifetime of carefully orchestrated failures that had been disguised as family dynamics. There's something else, Cassandra, something I think you need to understand about the current situation. What? The character assassination campaign, the social media manipulation, the family pressure, that's not just legal strategy. That's the same pattern he's always used, just scaled up. He's trying to make you the unstable sister again, the one who needs protection from her own delusions, so he can position himself as the rational, successful brother who's being victimized by your psychological problems. The realization was devastating and liberating at the same time. He's been gaslighting me my entire life. What do you think about that? I paused, feeling something shift inside me that I'd never felt before. I think I'm done being the supporting character in Damien's story about his own success. For the first time in 6 weeks of therapy, Dr. Rodriguez smiled. Now we're getting somewhere. The call came at 6:47 a.m. on December 15th, 10 days before Christmas. I was in my kitchen, making coffee and reviewing my testimony notes for the federal grand jury hearing scheduled for the following week, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Something about the early hour and the unfamiliar area code made me answer, despite my usual policy of screening unknown calls. Cassandra, it's Margaret. Aunt Margaret. Damien's primary ally in the family character assassination campaign, the woman who'd spent months telling relatives that I was having a psychological breakdown and fabricating stories about my successful brother. Margaret, this is unexpected. Cassandra, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Damien is in the hospital. My hand tightened around the coffee mug. What happened? He was in a car accident last night. Single vehicle, lost control on Highway 9 near Millerville. He's alive, but... Her voice broke. He's in intensive care. Internal injuries, possible brain trauma. They don't know if he's going to make it. The silence stretched between us for what felt like hours. Outside my kitchen window, Silverton was waking up to another normal Tuesday, completely unaware that my world had just shifted on its axis. Are you there, Cassandra? I'm here. The family is gathering at Mercy General Hospital, room 412 in the ICU wing. I know things have been complicated between you and Damien recently, but he's fighting for his life. This is family, Cassandra. This is more important than business disputes. Business disputes. Even now, even with Damien potentially dying, she couldn't acknowledge what he'd actually done. It was still just a business dispute in her mind, sibling rivalry that had gotten out of hand. Margaret, I appreciate you calling to let me know. I hope he recovers. That's it? You hope he recovers? Her voice sharpened with familiar disapproval. Cassandra, your brother could die today. Are you really going to let some patent lawsuit or whatever this is about be the last thing between you? Patent lawsuit. The federal investigation into systematic fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy had become a, quote, patent lawsuit in the family mythology. Margaret, I need you to understand something. I hope Damien recovers, because I don't wish death on anyone, especially not someone I grew up with. But if he recovers, he's still going to face federal charges for the crimes he committed. His being in the hospital doesn't change what he did. How can you be so cold? This is your brother Cassandra, your flesh and blood. The same argument I'd been hearing my entire life, weaponized now in the face of a medical emergency. Blood relations as the ultimate trump card, designed to override logic, justice, and self-preservation. Margaret, I have to go. I hope the family finds peace during this difficult time. I hung up before she could respond, but the phone immediately rang again, then again. By 7:30 a.m., I'd received calls from 6 different relatives, each delivering variations of the same message. Family emergency trumps everything. Time to forgive and forget, be the bigger person, don't let him die with this conflict unresolved. The last call was from my cousin Rachel, the only family member who'd supported me throughout the investigation. Cass, I just heard about Damien, are you okay? I don't know how to answer that question. The family is losing their minds. Aunt Margaret is telling everyone you refused to come to the hospital, that you're more concerned with your lawsuit than your brother's life. She's painting you as heartless. Of course she was. Even Damien's accident was becoming another opportunity to rewrite the narrative, to make me the villain who chose money over family love. Rachel, can I ask you something honestly? Always. Do you think I should go to the hospital? She was quiet for a long moment. Cass, I think you should do whatever allows you to live with yourself. But I also think you should be prepared for what you'll find if you do go. What do you mean? I mean, the family has spent months convincing themselves that you're having a psychological breakdown, that your accusations against Damien are the product of mental illness. If you show up at the hospital, they're going to interpret that as proof that you've come to your senses and realized how wrong you've been. And if I don't show up, then you're the cold-hearted sister who let business disputes override family love. The impossible choice, perfectly designed. Show up and validate their narrative that I was wrong about everything. Stay away and confirm their narrative that I was heartless and mentally unstable. By 10 a.m., I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of Mercy General Hospital, staring up at the ICU windows and trying to decide who I wanted to be. The decision came down to a simple question. What would I regret more, seeing Damien one last time or not seeing him? The ICU wings smelled like disinfectant and despair. Room 412 was at the end of a long hallway, and I could see the cluster of family members gathered outside even before I reached the door. Margaret, 3 cousins, Damien's ex-girlfriend Sandra, and several people I didn't recognize. They all turned when they saw me approaching, their expressions ranging from surprised relief to suspicious disappointment. Margaret stepped forward, her face softening into what she probably thought was a welcoming smile. "Cassandra, I'm so glad you came. I knew you'd realize what was really important." I looked past her to the hospital room window, where I could see Damien connected to multiple machines, his face pale and swollen, barely recognizable as the confident man who'd called me broke just months earlier. "How is he?" "Stable but critical," Sandra answered. "The doctors say the next 48 hours are crucial. There's swelling in his brain, and they're not sure about the extent of neurological damage." I nodded, absorbing the medical information while mentally preparing for what came next. "I'd like to see him alone for a few minutes." Margaret's smile faltered slightly. "Cassandra, perhaps it would be better if someone was with you, given the emotional circumstances." "No, I need to see him alone." The room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft whoosh of the ventilator. Damien looked smaller than I remembered, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen him. The machines surrounding his bed were keeping him alive, measuring every heartbeat, every breath, every brain wave. I stood next to his bed for several minutes, looking at the brother I'd grown up with, the person who'd shared my childhood, who'd known all my dreams and fears and had systematically used that knowledge to sabotage my life. "I don't know if you can hear me, Damien, but I need to say this." His face was still, peaceful in a way it never was when he was conscious and calculating his next advantage. "I hope you recover. I genuinely hope you wake up and get the chance to rebuild your life into something honest and authentic. But if you do recover, you're still going to face the consequences of what you did. This accident doesn't erase the fraud, the theft, the systematic destruction of other people's businesses." The monitors continued their steady rhythm, indifferent to the weight of the words being spoken. "For 31 years, I believed that family meant protecting you from consequences, covering for your mistakes, and accepting your version of reality even when it contradicted my own experience. I believed that being a good sister meant making myself smaller so you could feel bigger." I reached out and touched his hand, surprised by how cold it felt. "But I understand now that none of that was love. It was enabling, and if you survive this, I'm not going to enable you anymore. I'm not going to pretend that family relationships exist outside the boundaries of basic human decency." The door opened behind me, and Margaret stepped into the room. "Cassandra, the doctors want to speak with the family about treatment decisions. They need to know if there are any complications that might affect his care." Complications. She was asking whether I would use his medical crisis as leverage in the federal case, whether I would somehow try to harm him while he was helpless. "Margaret, the only complication is that Damien is facing federal criminal charges that have nothing to do with his medical care. I'm not going to interfere with his treatment, but I'm also not going to use his accident as an excuse to drop the charges or stop cooperating with the investigation. But surely, given the circumstances, I hope he recovers fully, so he can face trial as a healthy person who's capable of taking responsibility for his actions." I looked at Damien one last time, lying motionless in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines that were doing the work his body couldn't do. "I forgive you for what you did to me, Damien, not because family requires it, but because I refuse to carry the weight of your choices anymore. But forgiveness doesn't mean there shouldn't be consequences." I walked toward the door, then turned back to Margaret. "I'll pray for his recovery, but I won't sacrifice justice for the illusion of family peace." Walking out of that hospital, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete moral clarity. I had faced the ultimate test of my resolve, and discovered that my commitment to truth and justice was stronger than guilt, stronger than family pressure, and stronger than the desperate desire to return to the comfortable fiction that had defined my relationship with Damien for 3 decades. Whatever happened next, I could live with my choices. 18 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of my new house in Riverside Hills, watching snow fall through the floor-to-ceiling windows, when the news alert popped up on my phone. The news Orsmangspixties former Meridian financial executive sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for fraud conspiracy. News Orsmangspiracy. News Orsmangspiracy. Damian Vale, 34, was sentenced today in federal court for his role in a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme that targeted security consulting firms across 3 states. Judge Patricia Morrison called Vale's crimes a systematic betrayal of trust that damaged dozens of legitimate businesses and defrauded clients of millions in fees. Vale pled guilty to wire fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering charges after a comprehensive FBI investigation uncovered evidence of intellectual property theft, client misrepresentation, and organized fraud spanning more than 3 years. This case represents one of the most extensive corporate espionage operations we've prosecuted in recent years, said U.S. Attorney Michael Santos. Mr. Vale's actions went far beyond simple theft. They constituted a deliberate effort to undermine the competitive integrity of an entire industry. Mr. Vale will serve his sentence at a federal minimum security facility and will be required to pay $8.4 million in restitution to affected businesses. I set down my coffee and stared out at the snow-covered garden, feeling something I hadn't expected: relief. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just the quiet relief that comes when a long, difficult chapter finally ends. Damian had recovered from his accident, though with some permanent neurological damage that affected his short-term memory and motor coordination. The family had spent months using his medical condition to argue for reduced charges or alternative sentencing, but the federal prosecutors had been clear. The scope of his crimes and the damage to multiple businesses required significant consequences. The 12-year sentence was actually less than what he could have received. His cooperation with the investigation, his guilty plea, and his medical condition had all worked in his favor during sentencing. But 12 years was still 12 years. Enough time for the security consulting industry to heal, for his victims to rebuild, and for him to truly understand the magnitude of what he'd done. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Saw the news. How are you feeling?" I typed back, ready to finally close this chapter and focus on the future. And I meant it. The past year and a half had been transformative in ways I couldn't have imagined when I first discovered the theft of my Novatech proposal. Vale Dynamics had not only survived the character assassination campaign, it had thrived. The publicity surrounding the federal case had brought attention to the company's work, and several of the businesses that had been victimized by Damian's fraud had become clients. We'd grown from a one-woman operation to a team of 12 security professionals, with offices in 3 states and a client roster that included Fortune 500 companies. But more importantly, I'd rebuilt my relationship with myself. The therapy sessions with Dr. Rodriguez had continued long after the initial breakthrough, helping me understand not just Damian's patterns of manipulation, but my own patterns of accepting less than I deserved. I'd learned to recognize the difference between healthy family loyalty and destructive enablement. I'd learned that setting boundaries wasn't selfish. It was essential for authentic relationships. The family relationships had been more complicated to navigate. About half the relatives had eventually acknowledged that they'd been wrong about the situation, especially after the FBI evidence became public. Others, including Aunt Margaret, had doubled down on their belief that family should protect family regardless of circumstances. The divide had been painful but ultimately clarifying. It showed me which relationships were built on genuine care and which were built on obligation and control. Most surprisingly, some of the strongest support had come from unexpected sources. 3 cousins I'd barely spoken to in years had reached out during the investigation to share their own stories of being manipulated or diminished by Damian over the years. Apparently, I hadn't been his only target, just his most successful one. My doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the front window, I could see a delivery truck and a young man carrying a large bouquet of flowers. The card read, "Congratulations on your success and your courage. Your willingness to stand up for what's right made it possible for all of us to get justice. The team at Pinnacle Security Solutions." It was one of dozens of similar messages I'd received over the past 18 months from businesses that had been victimized by Damien's fraud. Many of them had received significant financial settlements as part of the restitution process, but more importantly, they'd gotten answers to questions that had been haunting them for years. Robert Chen from Pinnacle had put it best during a conference call last spring. "We spent 2 years thinking we were failing as a company, questioning our strategies, wondering why we couldn't compete with firms like Meridian. Finding out that we were actually being sabotaged by organized fraud was devastating. But it was also liberating. We weren't incompetent. We were being cheated." That afternoon, I was working in my home office when another unexpected visitor arrived. Through the security system's camera, I could see a woman in her 50s standing on my front porch, looking nervous but determined. When I opened the door, she introduced herself as Linda Harrison, Theodore Blackstone's former legal assistant. "Ms. Vale, I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I wanted to speak with you privately about something that's been weighing on my conscience." I invited her in, curious about what could have brought Damien's former lawyer's assistant to my door. "Ms. Vale, I need you to know that I quit Blackstone and Associates 6 months ago because I couldn't continue being part of what they were doing to you." "What do you mean?" "The character assassination campaign, the social media manipulation, the fake reviews. I was the one coordinating most of it. Mr. Blackstone told me it was standard reputation management for a client facing false accusations, but after the FBI evidence became public, I realized I'd been participating in witness intimidation and obstruction of justice. The revelation was shocking but not entirely surprising. The campaign against me had been too sophisticated, too coordinated to be the work of amateurs." "Linda, why are you telling me this now?" "Because I've been watching your company's success over the past year, and I've realized that everything we tried to destroy about your reputation, your integrity, your competence, your stability, those were actually your greatest strengths. The fact that you survived what we put you through and came out stronger proves that we were attacking the wrong person all along." She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. "This contains documentation of everything we did. The social media campaigns, the fake reviews, the coordination with family members, the intimidation tactics. I've already provided copies to the FBI for their obstruction investigation, but I wanted you to have the originals." "Why?" "Because I need you to know that what happened to you wasn't random business hardship or family drama. It was a deliberate, coordinated attack by people who knew you were telling the truth and were desperate to discredit you before that truth came out." After Linda left, I sat in my living room reading through the documentation of the campaign that had been waged against me. It was even more extensive than I'd realized. Fake social media accounts, paid influencers, coordinated family pressure campaigns, even attempts to plant negative stories about Vale Dynamics in trade publications. But instead of feeling angry or vindicated, I felt something closer to pity. All of that effort, all of those resources, all of that calculated cruelty. And it had ultimately failed because the truth had been stronger than the lies. That evening, I called Dr. Rodriguez for the first time in months. "Elena, I wanted to thank you for something." "What's that, Cassandra?" "For helping me understand that healing isn't about getting justice from the people who hurt you. It's about building a life so authentic and fulfilling that their ability to hurt you becomes irrelevant." "How do you feel about that now?" "I feel free. For the first time in my adult life, I'm not waiting for Damien to acknowledge what he did, or for the family to validate my experience, or for anyone else to give me permission to live my life on my own terms." As I hung up, I realized that the snow had stopped falling and the evening light was filtering through my windows in a way that made everything look golden and new. Somewhere, Damien was beginning his first night in federal prison, finally facing consequences that no amount of charm or manipulation could change. Somewhere, the businesses he'd victimized were thriving again, freed from the sabotage that had been undermining their success. Somewhere, other people who'd been taught to accept mistreatment in the name of family loyalty were hopefully learning that they deserved better. And here, in the house I'd bought with money earned from the business I'd built back from the ashes of his betrayal, I was finally living the life I'd always been capable of. If only I'd understood sooner that I didn't need anyone's permission to succeed. The little girl who'd accepted a broken pink bike instead of the blue one she'd earned was gone. The teenager who'd spent graduation day alone was gone. The woman who'd made herself smaller so her brother could feel bigger was gone. What remained was someone who understood that true strength wasn't about enduring mistreatment gracefully. It was about having the courage to demand better and the wisdom to walk away from people who refused to provide it. Christmas was 8 days away, and for the first time in decades, I was looking forward to it. Not because family would gather, or because old traditions would be repeated, but because I'd finally learned to celebrate my own company, my own accomplishments, and my own peace. Outside, fresh snow began falling again, covering the old footprints and creating a clean slate for whatever came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.